Chair Colloran, this is deeply shocking to someone of my disposition. I've never been a church basher, and my parents were very devout people, and indeed I grew up in a devout home where we said a decade of the rosary every night before we went to bed. Nevertheless, to find out that the Pope is a sinister figure who has covered up this stuff shakes me to my very core.
Well, I don't.
Am I naive?
I think, well, I'm a bit surprised by your comments, because anybody who's been in this country for the last 15, 20 years is only too well aware, unfortunately, of the criminal conspiracies and cover-ups, the protection of serial child rapists who are members of the Catholic clergy,
and allowing them to move on and commit other abuse.
Yes, so we've known that all along. We've known as well that the Church in Ireland is not fit for purpose, that it is effectively carrying on and has carried on and probably still is carrying on the notion of a state within a state, and that it has never bowed the knee properly to the civil authorities, and even I feel that there are certain bishops in this country still extant in position who should properly be behind bars because of the way they protected sex fiends.
Conor Lenihan, as a minister in the government, the responsibility of the state here, and indeed responsibility among Garda Síochána for prosecuting this, they seem to have been terribly neglected.
I mean, this is the point. I mean, I think, in fairness to Bertie Ahern, when this whole issue first cascaded into public consciousness and public realm, he was the first to get up and say the state is also culpable here, and that's why we've had these 3 inquiries. That is why we've had a process of compensation. And at the time, actually, some people were critical of Bertie Ahern as Taoiseach for actually opening, if you like, the checkbook in such a fashion towards compensation of victims. But in fact, it was very, very clear, if you read his first statement on the matter in the Dáil, that the Irish state had been complicit in some fashion with the church in the running.
They were deeply complicit.
So the point really is that it was hugely swift to open up and acknowledge, apologise and accept responsibility by the state and start a process of compensating the victims. Now, that's the state's role, and it continues to be an issue. But obviously, the church is obviously completely bedeviled by this at almost every place you look, UK, Ireland, United States, and in many cases it's Irish priests in the United States. It seems to be a coincidence of Irish priests perpetrating a significant amount.
Alex White, we've talked disparagingly, or I have this morning, about some journalists, but Mary Raftery in particular is somebody who's had a leading role in exposing all of this. Yeah. It tells a shocking story about our country.
It does, but I think the interesting thing that Geoffrey Robertson draws our attention to is the criminal culpability of bishops and indeed the Pope. I mean, that's the point that he's touching on here. He's saying, I mean, Conor's right, okay, the state has responsibility, so on, but we're talking about here is bishops and all the way to the person who is now the Pope, as to whether, I mean, yesterday some of the journalists were pointing out that it was the first time they ever heard the Pope describing these events as crimes, that the church has also described them
rather
as
than
sins.
Yes.
And some of the journalists yesterday were, I don't know whether they were just trying to sort of ratchet something out of it and say, well, he's actually said unspeakable crimes. Now, if the church is now into the language, which is exactly where this thing belongs, by the way, is in the language of the criminal law and of criminal culpability, that culpability attaches to them too.
And it also attaches to the judges. The judiciary here were implicated in this as well.
Sure.
So you had all the great power centres of the state
sent off to these homes where it was widely known in communities. And I mean, unlike you, I'm a baptised Catholic, but I don't come from a devout family. I was educated in a Quaker school, so I don't have any of the sort of baggage, for want of a better term, of a Catholic upbringing. Yeah. But I have been shocked to my absolute core. I read the Ryan report and the Murphy report, and I haven't been able to get some of the images out of my head since reading them when they were first published. And I think, to me, I'm kind of amazed actually at how the Pope, I'm impressed in a sense at his PR genius, that he's managed to kind of disarm his critics to the extent he has. The coverage in the British papers today, in the Sunday Times in particular, is incredibly positive about the Pope's visit. I don't know how he quite managed to do that, just through using the word unspeakable crimes, I suppose, but he did it without admitting any personal culpability. And his culpability, the part that he played in this is on the record. I mean, he refused, as Geoffrey was saying there, he refused to intervene to have have a bishop defrocked, even though he knew that the bishop was guilty of sex crimes against children. But the headline in the Sunday Times today says, "Is this God's Rottweiler? No, he's a holy granddad."
Well, the PR point about the coverage, I mean, there's a natural inclination on the part of people who are practicing Catholics, if the Pope is in their country, to gather together and to have these big events, and they are impressive looking on television.
Kind of rock star, isn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly, and there's a lot of smiling faces, people who are genuinely happy that the Pope is there, and that is a good news story. I mean, I'm not taking for a second from what Jennifer said, but I think we can explain why there's good feeling about it, because people who are Catholics and who believe in it, and maybe who are horrified by the bishops and by the Pope, they still want to be Catholics, you know, they're entitled to be so,
and also,
and to gather together, and I think that's what makes it a good
during
story.
His contributions, his public statements during the days he is in Britain.